We have so much to talk about. Send us a text, send me a tweet, share your thoughts, and we can talk after the news with Laura Cook.
Thank you. Good evening. The Prime Minister has said the UK is ready to recognise the Palestinian state within weeks. Sir Keir Starmer has been under pressure from his cabinet and backbenchers to follow the French lead and recognise Palestine. Speaking at a UN summit in New York, Foreign Secretary David Lammy has said Britain bears a special burden of responsibility to support the two-state solution. In the last 12 months, the government has repeatedly taken action in the face of the current crisis.
We have delivered 3 sanctions packages on violent settlers, and we suspended trade negotiations with the Israeli government, and we sanctioned far-right Israeli ministers for incitement. Yet, dear friends, the situation on the ground continues to worsen, and the two-state solution is in peril.
Mr Lammy also reiterated demands for Hamas to immediately return all Israeli hostages, agree to a ceasefire and commit to having no future in governing Gaza, adding Hamas must never be rewarded for the monstrous attack on October the 7th. South Yorkshire police are investigating allegations that 5 women who were child victims of the Rotherham grooming gangs say they were sexually abused at the time by police officers in the town. That investigation is being overseen by police complaints watchdog the IOPC. 3 former officers have been arrested. 1 is on police bail pending further inquiries, and 2 have been released from bail while the investigation continues. Times Special Projects reporter Tom Witherow has been reading the allegations in victim testimonies.
They're really the stuff of nightmares. There's one woman who said that she was raped from the age of 12 by a serving police officer in a marked car, and that he threatened her to go send her back to the grooming gang who was already abusing her if she didn't comply. We already knew that police officers weren't believing the girls. This was across the police, the council, social workers. But to now know that there could be perpetrators amongst them is just unbelievable. I mean, this is really the case of the highest level of police corruption.
Police are investigating an alleged assault at St Pancras Station in London as a video appears to show Tommy Robinson walking near a man on the floor. The right-wing activist, whose real name is Stephen Yaxi Lennon, has since reposted a tweet claiming self-defence. Officers say a 42-year-old from Bedfordshire left the country early yesterday morning. New York's mayor claims the suspect in a fatal shooting in Manhattan was trying to target the National Football League but took the wrong lift. 27-year-old Shane Tamura is accused of killing 4 people, including the lobby of a skyscraper housing some business headquarters. It's alleged he left a note blaming the NFL for a brain injury. The Bank of England's Governor Andrew Bailey has blocked the Chancellor Rachel Reeves from intervening in the regulation of financial technology giant Revolut. The Chancellor had been trying to organise a meeting to discuss the company's plans to become a fully fledged UK bank, but Andrew Bailey scrapped it over worries it represented political interference in the bank's independent oversight of the city. Times Radio's business correspondent Dominic O'Connell explains there's a bit more to it.
There's a bit of history here because Reeves has been making all these comments about regulators being rubbish and anti-growth. In her Mansion House speech, the regulators were a boot on the throat of businesses. And she's talked about taking away the retail ring fence, one of the main things that came out of the last banking crisis. And Bailey's indicated that he's not very keen on that either. So there's a bit of history there, and this is a pretty sharp edge to that tension, I think.
England manager Serena Wiegman has danced with her favourite artist in front of Buckingham Palace on the Lionesses' victory parade. Her side won back-to-back Euros titles on Sunday. For a roundup of news on demand, find the Times News Briefing on the Times Radio app.
Across the UK, on DAB Digital Radio, on the Times Radio app, and on your smart speaker.
Pienaar Friends on Times Radio with Barclays Business Banking.
It is really good to have you with us here on Pienaar and Friends. An hour of good conversation, I'm confident in saying, in very good company. I'm absolutely certain of that, because they are Rachel Cunliffe from the new Statesman. Hi to you, Rachel.
Hello.
And Tim Montgomerie, political commentator. Good to see you, Tim.
Very good. Good.
So I'm going to ask you first of all, let me just say first of all, we are live on YouTube. You can see us as well as listen to us as you choose. And either way, join in. I want to hear what you're thinking. Send me a text, 87222, start with the word Times, and let it go. Or tweet at Times Radio. Or you can send me a note, a voice note, on WhatsApp, on 0333 003 2353. And I very much hope that you do that. First of all, Tim, what's your thought for the day?
Well, it's a busy news day, and we're used to lots of ups and downs and changes constantly in the news today that influence us. Sometimes it's just useful to sort of pause and think about things that actually aren't changing and are becoming the new reality. And I haven't been on the programme for a couple of weeks, and so just wanted to say the fracturing, I think, of our political system now in terms of number of new parties and the fact that the old system of a duopoly of Conservatives and Labour, I think it may well have gone for quite some time. And so I mentioned, I haven't been here for a couple of weeks, because we had the launch of this new party by Jeremy Corbyn. And there's been a lot of mocking of it. And I understand why there's mocking of it, but I don't think it should be underestimated. I think Jeremy Corbyn doesn't just have supporters, he has disciples. He has a clarity, which I fundamentally disagree with, but he has a clarity on issues that appeals to people. I think Labour's coalition is way too broad. Starmer hasn't defined it. I think the Tories are in trouble for a long time. Reform is insurgent. Then we have the Green Party. The Liberal Democrats aren't going away. They've got 70 seats in Britain. It just may be one of the new realities in this changing political world that actually the fracturing we see of 5 or 6 political parties, I don't think we've done, John, anywhere enough thinking about what that means, because it could mean many more coalitions, many more hung parliaments. It could mean many seats being won on 25 or 30% of vote in certain constituencies if you've got multi-party. So it's a fast-changing political landscape on a day-by-day basis, but actually, and that's one of the new sort of constant things, is this fracturing, and I don't think we thought enough about it.
I think it's a fair point, Tim, and I think I have to agree with you. I think the idea of going back to a political duopoly, that's forget it, or even going back to the old sort of 2.5 party system we lived through for so many years. Why would that happen? I mean, class allegiances to parties, that is gone. And it's inherited allegiances to parties, that is gone. Now it's like shopping in Waitrose,
exactly.
and whatever the shiniest thing on the shelf is, that's what people are going to reach for, or maybe reach over there because they just hate what's on that shelf. That's where it's retail politics to a large extent, and we're not going to go back. And Corbyn, I don't know what Corbyn's going to get by way of support at the end of the day when the votes are counted, but if it's 7%, let's say, which is perfectly conceivable, that adds to this fracturing effect. So I think you certainly make a broad and a point it's really difficult to disagree with. Rachel, on that?
I think it's absolutely right, and I think that one of the, I've been saying this on this programme a couple of times, one of the potential consequences is we start to talk about whether our voting system can cope in an era of multi-party politics. It's all very well to say we love first past the post, it's worked, therefore you the voters are wrong, you the voters need to go back to voting for one party or the other, but voters don't like being told what to do. It doesn't look like they're doing that. It doesn't look like the voting system is pressuring them into making that choice in that way, in the way that perhaps they would have done in the past. They're already voting as if we're in a sort of multi-party European style system. So does our electoral model have to adapt?
Right, we've got so much, guys, to talk about on the programme this evening, but I do want to hear your thought for the day.
Mine's a positive one about I'm still basking in the triumph, the England Euros victory, the Lionesses, but watching the celebration today, the England manager Serena Wiegman, who is obviously Dutch, dancing up on stage in front of Buckingham Palace with her favourite artist, who's Nigerian, and the questions about English identity that were sort of raised by Chloe Kelly when she was proud to be English. And there's been a lot of discussion about English identity in politics over the last couple of months, actually going back further, all that, could Rishi Sunak be considered English because his parents of Indian descent? What does it mean to be English if you've got a foreign-born parent or a foreign-born grandparent? There are lots of commentators and some politicians actually who like to fudge those boundaries, sort of what counts as British and what doesn't. And it just struck me that the thousands of people who turned out to cheer for the Lionesses today really weren't thinking about any of that, and they didn't care at all that Michelle Adjeman, the 19-year-old Arsenal player who scored 2 definitive goals in the quarter and semi-finals, that she's born in Britain but from Ghanaian descent. And actually maybe the conversations that are going on in those corners of the internet and the commentariat are completely out of step with how most people in the country see English identity.
Yeah, it was nothing but positive on the field around the sport and for the effect, the sort of ripples of euphoria that have spread outwards from what happened in that, the women winning a major tournament. And that part of me, which is a big part, frankly, that it just gets delirious with joy at the sight of an England team winning anything, is in a very good place just at the moment. Now, we've got a lot to talk about, guys, and I'm going to start with, as you won't be surprised to hear, with the Middle East and the news that the British government is saying they will recognise a Palestinian state in September, with certain conditions laid down to Israel. We're going to hear in a moment from Catherine Philp, World Affairs editor at the Times. Hi to you, Catherine. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, John.
It's great to have you here, Catherine. I mean, not least because it's a really significant story, this. As for whether it changes very much in the world or on the ground in Gaza and the Middle East is really open to doubt. But we are seeing the tectonic plates shifting in a significant way. I just want to replay some of what we've been hearing in the course of our show live this afternoon. That news, Britain will recognise a Palestinian state in September. We have from Keir Starmer after his cabinet meeting.
Today, as part of this process towards peace, I can confirm the UK will recognise the State of Palestine by the United Nations General Assembly in September, unless the Israeli government takes substantive steps to end the appalling situation in Gaza, agree to a ceasefire, and commit to a long-term sustainable peace, reviving the prospect of a two-state solution. And this includes allowing the UN to restart the supply of aid and making clear that there will be no annexations in the West Bank.
Keir Starmer. Now, David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, was at the United Nations in New York discussing why this had come now.
Over the next 8 weeks, what we are attempting to do is affect the situation on the ground. We have seen the most horrific scenes. The global community is deeply offended by children being shot and killed as they reach out for aid. The time has come for a ceasefire. The time has come to see those hostages released, and the time has come to abate the suffering of the Palestinian people in Gaza, to get them the aid and the medical equipment and supplies that they need. And it is my sincere hope that the decision that we have taken today affects the situation on the ground.
And there was loud applause at the United Nations when the Foreign Secretary announced there that Britain was ready to recognise a state of Palestine. I also spoke on the programme to Fleur Hassan Nahum, who is a special envoy to the Israeli Foreign Ministry. And she was, dismissive of the whole thing, as you'll hear now.
Are they recognizing now Hamas as the rulers of Gaza, which is a proscribed terrorist group, as you know? Are they recognizing Mahmoud Abbas, who hasn't had an election in 20 years? And also they're talking about it like we hadn't tried. 5 times a two-state solution has been offered to the Palestinians and they've rejected it. So the question really is not about the declaration. The declaration is pretty empty when you can't back it up with reality. The Palestinians don't want it. 80% of the West Bankers have said they don't want it. And we know what Hamas feel about it. So I don't exactly understand why this is coming now, if it's performative, if they're doing it in order to quell down Islamists in the UK or the crazy woke left wing. I don't know.
For Hassan Nahum, as I say, pretty dismissive. Now, Catherine Philp, again, welcome. Now, you were listening to all of this and you've had a moment to reflect on it, Catherine. What is your hot take, as it were, now?
Well, I think it's very interesting that when announcing this decision, Starmer put conditions on it. And I see that as probably an effort to see off criticism that this is just a symbolic move, that if you don't back it up with anything. So he's talked about not only saying that Israel must let in aid, but that it must do more than a ceasefire, actually go back to some kind of peace process. So in essence, to commit to something that actually tackles the root causes of this. Otherwise, he would stand accused of simply, a performative declaration. Yes. She thought some of the things that Lamy said were almost even more interesting than what Starmer said, including his reflection on the moral responsibilities of the British government having issued the Balfour Declaration in 1917, saying that providing for a Jewish homeland in what was then mandatory Palestine. And he pointed out that in that declaration, Britain had said that it should not prejudice the rights of the existing population, and this has been something of a stain on the British conscience since, even before we saw the kind of scenes that we've seen in Gaza recently. Now, obviously, I'm not foolish enough to think that there hasn't been a lot of domestic politics playing out in this, that Keir Starmer found himself under in this situation. But I think that the situation in Gaza is so appalling and so irredeemable that having an international human rights lawyer as a prime minister who is unable to sort of hold this one up and say, actually, there's no point saying in essence that you believe in a two-state solution if you can't put your money where your mouth is. So. Yeah. Well, I don't necessarily think that Britain has very much sway over decisions that are made in Israel. I mean, it's sometimes hard to see how much sway even Donald Trump has in some of these decisions. He hasn't been able to force a ceasefire. But I think effectively we're seeing here Starmer acting on what he was essentially given permission to do this yesterday by Donald Trump. So. Yes. At least that he could say it without causing any massive fallout with the US. So ultimately has been able to, I think Lamy actually used a line from Blair, didn't he? Talked about the hand of history on our shoulders. And there is a growing sense, I think, that history is going to judge us all very, very harshly for our silence over what's happened in Gaza.
Yeah, as we're speaking, Catherine, the Israel Foreign Ministry. No, this is from it is from the Foreign Ministry of Israel, and not surprisingly, it is a total dismissal. They talk about the shift being, and I'm quoting now, it follows the French move and internal political pressures. It constitutes, they say, the ministry a reward for Hamas and harms efforts to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza and a framework for the release of hostages, which is pretty much an echo, isn't it, of what the Israeli government said after the move by Macron to announce the recognition of Palestine.
Can I just
please, Catherine, yeah.
John, with one thing that Fleur said there, I think there is an enduring myth that Israel has offered Palestine, the Palestinians, a state 5 times and they've rejected this. It's not actually true. Even Rabin, who went about as far as anyone ever went with the Oslo peace accords, which cost him his life, never committed to a Palestinian state. And the PLO have, in fact, committed to recognise Israel's right to exist. And that has never happened the other way round. In fact, the Likud party position paper says that there will be no sovereignty between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea that is not Israeli. So I do think, there's almost nothing I could say right now about this situation that would be accepted by everyone. Yes. Everyone has got their narrative here, but there is this very persistent Israeli narrative that they've been so generous and so kind and offered the Palestinians this so many times that then they never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. Look, they have not been perfect partners for peace. They've been terrible partners for peace. But that is patently false, that claim that they've been offered this over and over again.
Now, Catherine, I do want to bring in Tim and Rachel in just a moment. But before we do, just a word from you on we don't yet know what the long-term plan, which is being worked on now, is going to be announced in due course by the government, is going to look like precisely. But just logic says it's going to have to follow in the footsteps of the plan that was set up by the Egyptian and Jordanian side back in March that was very instantly rejected, isn't it?
What the British government's support for a process would be?
No, what the eventual plan, what it might look like when we finally see it. I'm remembering the Egypt-Jordan plan, which spoke about an interim administration of Palestinians, technocrats rather than political players.
I mean, we are so far. I think we are so far from that stage of things. I mean, I was recording a podcast before I came on you, and I'm being asked about this, what the parameters of a two-state solution would look like. I mean, we are so far from that. This idea that I understand the emotion behind the idea that it rewards Hamas because, it comes after October 7th. But Hamas have actually indicated in their negotiations with the Qataris that they understand that they cannot be in control anymore. Yeah. There's no question that any future Palestinians would be ruled by Hamas.
No, indeed. And I was referring really to the shape of the plan rather than the outcome. I mean, the idea of a shift towards that is, as you say, way, way over the horizon and beyond, beyond sight.
Yeah, I would say that perhaps the best thing to say about that is that Britain will have very little to do with shaping it. Yeah. It will be for others to do so.
Yeah, fair point. Tim, you're keen to get in.
Well, I could comment on what Catherine's just been saying. Talk to Bill Clinton about the Palestinians' role in rejecting offers from Israel. I just think that was a really one-sided account of recent history. But I want to get back to the substance of what's been agreed or proposed by the British government today. And I think all of it, we've been in the studio, sat many times, Rachel, yourself and I, John, talking about the situation in Gaza and the deterioration. The awfulness of it now is, I think, now beyond any question. All of us want it to stop. What I don't get, and I still don't get, is why this is being linked to the Palestinian state. It's like we feel we need to do something, and this is the option that Macron and other leaders have decided. They seem to me to be completely unrelated issues. Is that there may be a case for a Palestinian state, but at the moment you can't give a state to a completely divided setup. There's one authority in Gaza, there's another authority on the West Bank, neither have democratic mandates. What are we doing? Of course we want to stop the human catastrophe that we're all witnessing in Gaza. I wish I hadn't seen it, but I'm glad I had in a way. To see via Owen Jones's Twitter account recently the last gasp of a dying boy, and I can't get it out of my head. It's beyond awful. We all have to do whatever we can about this, but I don't at all understand why this policy helps in any of that.
Okay, Catherine, how would you answer that?
I can help you with that. It's absolutely integral to it. So one of the reasons that this division you have between the two sides, this has served the purposes of Likud, and it has served Netanyahu in particular, this idea that you keep the Palestinians separate and divided, and one side of them, Hamas, is so appalling that you are able to point to them and say this was what happened if you establish a Palestinian state. So Benjamin Netanyahu was behind the policy of getting Qatar to send billions to Hamas to sustain them.
This is conspiracy theory stuff. Really
no,
is.
It's not. It's
it really is.
No, Tim, that's absolutely outrageous. It's actual fact. It is true.
It's very disputed. You know it's very disputed.
No, it's not disputed at all. Perhaps you should watch the BB Files, a new documentary. It's all there. Netanyahu said to his own cabinet, anyone who wishes to prevent the emergence of a Palestinian state must back Hamas. They are an excellent foil to point at and say, look, we pulled out of Gaza and that's what's happened. That is what will happen. So the point is that Netanyahu had this policy, and also the policy of the status quo of going in and mowing the lawn, as it was called, when there were conflicts in Gaza and the Israeli military would go in. They wouldn't dismantle Hamas then. They kept it there. And they would go back in. And that policy blew up in the face of the Israeli people spectacularly on October 7th, because the status quo in Israel-Palestine is not sustainable. You cannot keep people under occupation for 70 years and just think that that's sustainable.
This is Hamas left-wing propaganda. It really is from you. It wasn't Israel that was the principal player. They withdrew from the Gaza Strip, and Hamas accelerated their radicalism.
I'm going to break in here just briefly, if you'll forgive me. Tim Montgomerie, as you can hear there, who has very strong feelings about this. Rachel Cunliffe, who's going to be coming in just a moment. And very grateful, as I say, for Catherine Philp's presence on the programme to give us her particular depths of understanding and help with just analysing this tangled story. We're going to carry on in just a moment here on Pienaar and Friends with Barclays Business Banking. Grow your business, bank on Barclays.
Radio app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Pienaar and Friends on Times Radio with Barclays Business Banking. Grow your business. Bank on Barclays.
And here with me on Pienaar and Friends, Tim Montgomerie, political commentator, Rachel Cunliffe from the New Statesman, and Catherine Philp, the World Affairs editor at the Times. Catherine, I'm going to invite you back in now because Tim had the last word on that bit of the conversation and was basically accusing you of recycling Hamas propaganda when you were talking about the view that Bibi Netanyahu was in at the early days of Hamas and indeed encouraged and cultivated Hamas with the strategic aim of dividing the Palestinians, sort of divide and rule. I want you to come back on that because I spoke to Anshul Pfeffer, by the way, who's a Bibi Netanyahu a biographer, who was supporting a pretty widespread view that Bibi Netanyahu was there at the beginning, and that was a part of the broad political strategy. What do you have to say at this point, Catherine?
Yeah, well, John, I'm not going to get into a feces throwing contest with Tim Montgomerie on this. This is a question of fact and record, and as you said, Anshul Pfeffer, who is Bibi's biographer, has documented this. Many people have documented it, and it is well known. You can look all over the Israeli media about what he said about using Hamas in order to prevent the emergence of a Palestinian state.
All right, Catherine, I just wanted to give you an opportunity. I wanted to come back on that.
One more thing about what I would say my main issue with this coming up now is that for years the Palestinian statehood has been sort of held out as a potential prize for good behavior from the Palestinians, when in fact really it should be a question about do people deserve self-determination or not. Okay. And it's now being used as a sort of punishment against Israel for bad behavior, and it shouldn't be about that. In that sense, I agree with him that it shouldn't be connected to what's going on right now. Okay. But this is a question about acknowledging people's right to self-determination.
Okay, I do want to give Rachel a say, but Tim, I do want to give you a final because nobody is blocked from having their say on this programme and in this studio. What would you say?
This is a discussion that Catherine and I could probably have for hours over bottles of wine. I fundamentally look what Catherine describes as facts are very contested, actually, inside Israel, not least, and I think I'll leave it there.
Okay, then we will duly leave it there. Rachel, what are you thinking? What's on your mind?
I'm going to zoom out from this and just look at some of the practicalities of it. There was a debate last week when I think it was only Thornbury first raised the prospect of recognising a Palestinian state. Obviously, the debate's been going on longer than that about, yes, but how will that actually help on the ground? How will that address the humanitarian crisis, the starvation, which is something that all of us in this studio, Catherine over Zoom, people across the country, I think people across the world are horrified at the situation and want to know what can be done to improve the situation. And the question is, will the UK saying it will recognise a Palestinian state have any impact whatsoever on the Israeli government and on the situation on the ground. And I think what Keir Starmer has tried to do with the conditionality of this statement, which is that they will recognise a Palestinian state unless Israel take the steps that the UK government and other countries are urging them to take in terms of relieving the humanitarian crisis. That is an attempt to use the issue of statehood, which is it's symbolic rather than practical, in order to enact effective and practical change. Immediately, though, it raises a whole lot of questions, because is what Keir Starmer is saying that if Israel meet the steps that he is asking them to about allowing aid in and restarting the peace process, then the UK government won't recognise a Palestinian state, because that's what the word unless means. Yeah. And if that is what the UK government is saying, then I think that the 221 MPs who wrote to the Prime Minister about recognising Palestinian statehood would have something to say about that. And it also, I think, is in a different position to the one taken by other countries. It's a bargaining chip rather than a statement of British foreign policy, and I think getting those two things clear is actually really quite important, and it's not clear from the statement which of the two things it is.
I think that's a genuinely strong and valid point. The use of the word unless there doesn't mean what one might think it means at first sight. I mean, we could go on, as you say, for some hours. You could also argue, and some will, that saying that there will, until there's a ceasefire, unless there's a ceasefire, we will recognise Palestine. Now, does that not just encourage Hamas not to agree to a ceasefire? That we can talk about that. Lots of views to be had on this, and we will, no doubt, starting later and carrying on in these coming days. Right now, though, Catherine Foot, World Affairs Editor, thanks, Catherine, for coming on. Really grateful to you. And now we've got lots to talk about on this programme. After the news, we're going to be talking about the Rotherham scandal, extraordinary story that the victims, 5 victims of abuse in Rotherham, have now testified they were raped and abused by serving police officers. That is coming up here on Pienaar and Friends after the news at 6:31 with Eliza Phillips.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Thank you. Good evening. The Prime Minister says the UK will recognise the state of Palestine from September unless Israel takes substantive steps to end the suffering in Gaza. Sir Keir Starmer says Hamas must also release all hostages and shouldn't play a part in any future Gazan government. The Prime Minister's demanded at least 500 aid trucks enter the territory every day. Foreign Secretary David Lammy has reiterated Downing Street's position at the United Nations.
His Majesty's government therefore intends to recognise the state of Palestine when the UN General Assembly gathers in September here in New York.
South Yorkshire Police are investigating allegations that 5 women who were victims of the child of a Rotherham grooming gang say they were sexually abused at the time by police officers in the town. That investigation is being overseen by police complaints watchdog, the IOPC. 3 former officers have been arrested, 1 on police bail pending further inquiries, and 2 have been released from bail while the investigation continues. The Technology Secretary so far is resisting orders from Nigel Farage to apologise after accusing him of being on the side of perpetrators like Jimmy Savile. It's over Reform UK leaders' opposition to online safety laws. A 31-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of murder after 2 men were stabbed to death in South London. A 58 and 27-year-old were found in Southwark yesterday afternoon. And nearly 70,000 people packed into central London to watch the victorious Lionesses celebrate their Euros win with a bus parade and trophy lift. Musicians Heather Small and Burna Boy took to the stage outside Buckingham Palace earlier today. And for a roundup of news on demand, find the Times News Briefing on the Times Radio app.
This is Times Radio.
Today's the day.
Times Radio on YouTube for the latest videos and interviews.
Pienaar Friends on Times Radio with Barclays Business Banking. Find out how Barclays can help to move your business forward. Search Barclays Business.
Tim Montgomerie is here with me, as is Rachel Cunliffe, and we're joined by Kate Borsay, who takes over at 7 o'clock, and I think is on the line. Hello, Kate.
Hiya, John. Good evening.
It's good to hear your voice. We were just looking around the studio, wondering where you were, looking slightly mystified. So what have you got coming up?
I'm hiding.
It is such a news day, Kate, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly is. Look, John, we've been in Southport all day today, marking 1 year since the horrendous attack of those 3 little girls who attended a dance workshop in the town on the 29th of July 2024. BB King, who was the youngest of the 3, 6 years old, Alice Aguiar, 9, and Elsie Stankham, who was 7. And of course, the families and all the other children affected by what happened a year ago today. And then, of course, what's been described to me today as a double tragedy, because the next day saw violent protests turn into riots here in the town. And many of the locals I've been speaking to today are still astonished. They still struggle to come to terms with linking one and the other. Many say they feel that they were targeted, that there were groups of people dissatisfied in the UK at that time who chose to descend upon Southport to voice their frustration at what they felt were rising levels of immigration, misinformation online, of course. We remember that time. And people here in the town still really hurting from that, just still unable to fathom why those riots should come the day after as a result of such an awful tragedy. John, today at 3 o'clock we had 3-minute silence held, and that actually stretched to 5 or 6 minutes, because the people here of Southport, about 150 of them in the gardens outside the town hall where I am at the moment in the centre of Southport, the people there felt they wanted to spend a bit longer remembering. It felt appropriate. People were linking arms or with bowed heads and hands clasped in front of them, just remembering. And I think it's very much a show of solidarity, John. They wanted the people of Southport today to come together as one and show their togetherness, paying their respects. It's been a really powerful day, as you'd expect. I've been speaking to lots of the locals here, including a little 8-year-old girl, Orla. She stood with her mum, Roisin, and Orla is a school friend of BB King, who was killed at the hands of Axel Rudakabana. And she'd attended the 3-minute silence, and she told me how she was feeling about the day.
I'm feeling a bit sad, and I'm feeling a little bit angry at the same time, because when I woke up this morning, I literally felt like it's been a year since this has happened, and I'm like, why did it happen? Like, they didn't deserve it, because they were all kind little girls, and I don't think it should have happened. When I realised that BB, who was my friend, was involved in it, I was crying like a lot, because I didn't think that would happen to her.
Well, that is Orla, who is 8 and a school friend of BB King, who was the youngest victim of the Southport attack. Spoke to me at length, actually, and you'll hear more of that in the show, as well as local faith leaders. We're speaking to the imam, and of course the day after the attack, the mosque here in Southport was targeted. It became the focal point of those violent protests, and the imam will describe to us what he experienced on that evening when it all became like a tinderbox here in the town. We'll also speak to other locals in the town as well, and I'm joined by Patrick Maguire, who is at the Times' chief political commentator, as you know, John, who hails from Southport, and I think will be able to give us a really valuable perspective and some introspection, I'm sure, on what it means to be from Southport and how the community really works to try and come together and, respect what's happened, but also move the community forward as well.
Okay, much then for you to share with us after 7 o'clock, after this show, Kate. Thank you for giving us that heads up on what is coming a little later on Times Radio. Now, we've got Tim Montgomerie here, Rachel Cunliffe is here, I am here, and today we've been talking about, discussing and analysing some very important, in this case, truly shocking stories. This was the story of victims of the Rotherham grooming gangs testifying that members of the South Yorkshire Police also sexually assaulted and raped them. I spoke to the Times Special News Project's correspondent Tom Witherow, who outlined what had come out.
Just reading some of these testimonies, which have been given to a law firm in the hope of winning compensation from South Yorkshire Police, and they're really the stuff of nightmares. There's one woman who said that she was raped from the age of 12 by a serving police officer in a marked car, and that he threatened her to go send her back to the grooming gang who was already abusing her if she didn't comply. We already knew that police officers weren't believing the girls. This was across the police, the council, social workers, but to now know that there could be perpetrators amongst them is just unbelievable. I mean, this is really the case of the highest level of police corruption, and there's evidence in the testimony that the police were effectively working with the grooming gangs. A couple of the people who have been accused were dealing drugs to the gangs, and in that story you could see that they were using the threat of further and greater abuse.
So shocking is the most and the most appropriate word that's been used over and over again since that story broke just shortly before I came on air this afternoon. Well, I spoke to the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, who told me in our interview that this whole affair was shocking, and she took the view that it underlined the case as she saw it for a national inquiry.
I've only just heard this myself. I think it's absolutely shocking. This allegation, to me, is proof that we do need a national inquiry. That's the only thing that's going to get to the bottom of what actually happened. And one of the things that has been quite striking about this story hasn't just been the scandal of the crimes and just the sheer wickedness of it, but where it seemed like the state authorities, whether it's councils, police, social care, that either looked away or seemed to have a hand in it. And I do think that that's something we must get to the bottom of.
Kemi Badenoch speaking to me earlier. Rachel Cunliffe, I mean, I can just see in your eyes, in all of our eyes, just the extraordinary sense of, my goodness me, what on earth is this?
Yeah, Kemi Badenoch there called it shocking. Tom Witherow called it unbelievable. Sadly, I don't think that it is unbelievable. I think that with a scandal of this scale that involved so many different layers of the state and governance, some kind of sense of institutional cover-up and institutions getting involved in it that was almost inevitable. And actually this was raised by people at the time, and I think it's really important that with this multi-decade scandal we don't go for the simplistic answers. So there is a race element to this. We know there's a race element. It came out in Louise Casey's report that was covered up, and there were an awful lot of people who were arguing that the reason it had all been covered up was all to do with race. It was all to do with multiracial relations and people not wanting to be seen as racist, and that's why it didn't get reported and properly dealt with. And that is part of the story. It is also clearly part of the story. There was a lot of other things going on. People at the time, myself included, who tried to make the point that maybe it is also, yes, it's about race, but also about sexism, misogyny, abuses of power, how young women in the 90s, 2000s, young vulnerable women were often treated by the state and by figures of authority. And maybe we could have that conversation as well. In addition, that conversation about victims being believed or not being believed, and about abuses within police forces, which we knew was an issue. Those voices were shouted down, and we were kind of accused of trying to dismiss the ethnicity angle, which wasn't the case at all. And I think that it's really important to have both parts of the conversation. And Nigel Farage did a big press conference on Monday about crime and Reform's plans to tackle crime. And one of the questions I asked him directly then was about this plan to get rid of all DEI initiatives in police forces, and how that relates to the party's plans to tackle violence against women and girls, when we know that there is a culture within certain police forces that is deeply misogynistic, and we have seen scandals with individuals using their positions of power, whether it is Wayne Cossens and Sarah Everard, or whether it is cases like this, using their positions of authority in order to commit violence against women and girls. And he dismissed the question entirely, passed it on to Colin Sutton, who was the former police inspector who he's got on board leading his crime review, who answered my question by telling me that it was all about Theresa May and austerity, meaning that police weren't getting properly trained. Now, this is a scandal that goes back to the late 90s and the 2000s, and it's got to go hand in hand. We have to have conversations about embedded misogyny, abuses of power, the fact that victims are so often not believed, and that the kind of individuals who are attracted to, find it appealing to go into the police forces, are on average statistically more likely to be the kind of people who want positions of power, possibly for the wrong reasons. Not all of them, but it is a trend that we can see in police forces across the country and in other countries too, and that absolutely has to be part of the conversation. So yes, shocking. No, it's not unbelievable at all. And the fact that we're only able to have this conversation now because these, I think, 5 women have been incredibly brave and come forward with the abuse they suffered decades ago, really sort of tells us something about still how reluctant we are to have that conversation as a society.
Tim.
Well, completely compelling what you've just said, Rachel, and I hope a lot of people listen to what you just said.
Thank you.
I would say something different, but I've been very fortunate. I came from a home where I was safe, loved in a beautiful way. Many people listening to this program have had that experience, and I've when I sort of started to hear about abuse of children, and also I found it very hard to contemplate because it was so the reverse and different from my own experience, but partly through my involvement in the Centre for Social Justice. And seeing the level of abuse that took place, for example, during the lockdown period. This is a much bigger problem in our society in so many ways. And it's such an ugly, horrible side of our society that I think we want it to go away. But stories like this just show we can't continue to ignore it. What Rachel just said about why the police may have been complicit in some of this. How shocking does it have to get before we really do start to realise that actually this is far too common in our society? And because people like me never experienced anything like it, was contrary to, we may not believe it. But it's clearly true, and it's on a scale which should, Kemi Badenoch in her interview with you, John, said we need a national inquiry. It's almost like a national inquiry. It's like we need a national revolution. It's like, what are we all going to do to keep an eye on what is happening to us? I don't really know what to say because it's so upsetting. But this is not an ordinary story. This, when the history books are written, this will be one of the great scandals of modern British life.
Yes, it certainly will. And I don't think you need to apologise for reacting with emotion rather than any kind of rational list of remedies, because an emotional reaction has its place, and it has that place now. We talked about this at length in the course of the programme on air this afternoon. I just wanted to get both of your thoughts on that. So thank you for that. We've got more to talk about before we're done. There is another thing that came out of my chat with Kemi Badenoch, her thoughts on why she was calling for doctors to be banned from striking by law, and other things too if we got time. Also, after the story of the announcement that Britain is moving towards the recognition of Palestine as a state, we now had a reaction from President Trump, who has spoken to journalists on his way back to the USA. We'll hear that too, and you will hear it too in just a minute. Here on Pienaar and Friends with Barclays Business Banking. Find out how Barclays can help move your business forward. Search Barclays Business. So as promised, let's have a listen to this. This is President Trump on his way back to the United States giving his reaction mid-flight to the announcement from Keir Starmer this afternoon.
He's on Gaza. Sir Keir Starmer has just announced the UK will recognise Palestinian sovereignty in September if Israel does not commit to a ceasefire, ease the suffering in Gaza and commit to a long-term solution that would deliver the two-state solution in the Middle East. Did you know that was coming? What is your response?
We never discussed it, surprisingly. It was never really discussed. Maybe a little bit at the news conference, but he was sort of discussing it with you. We never did discuss it, and we have no view on that. We're going to get a lot of money to the area so they can get some food. He's going to also. I think the European Union is going to put up money too for food, and hopefully it's going to be properly distributed, and it will be. I think it will be. We have some pretty good response on people for the distribution of the food.
So in itself, an interesting reaction, wasn't it, from President Trump, and saying he has no view on it. Yesterday at Turnberry, we heard Donald Trump saying, I'm not going to take a position. He was asked about Labour wanting the government, as they now have, to follow France's lead. He says, I don't mind him, Starmer, taking a position. I'm looking to get people fed right now, which, you know, in the scheme of things, counts as permission for Keir Starmer to go ahead and do what he's done.
I'm just so grateful just for the moment for a change of gear, John. My views on Trump have oscillated at various times, but I think it was very significant what he said before the meeting with Starmer yesterday. Just like it was sort of like at a gut level. He said he just couldn't stand watching children die and starve on television. And maybe, just like when he says he goes home to Melania and says, I've had a good conversation with Putin.
Yes.
And she says, well, I've just seen another bombing raid on Ukraine. And people sort of scratch their heads and think, well, surely you know that, Mr. President. Yeah. Why on earth does it take a television image or a conversation with your wife to remind you of some basic moral truths? And I have sympathy with that sort of concern at him. But I think it also says something about him. He may be impossible for some people to tolerate at times, but I don't think he's a fundamentally bad man. The opposite. I actually think he hates death and war. He hates suffering. Don't know where it comes from. It's often, within inside someone, it's hard to explain. But he, I think, realises that what's happening in Gaza now is beyond any defence. And he's the only person in the world who probably can influence Netanyahu and the Israeli government. And I think he probably has a tolerance now for Starmer moving in a different way, because he doesn't quite know how to constrain Israel, even him. And they do seem to have this extraordinary relationship, Starmer and Trump. It shouldn't be possible that the two get on the face of it. But they seem to, I don't know whether it's Starmer's realism or Trump's love of Britain, probably a combination of the two. But it seems to be a relationship that is working.
Yeah, well, I mean, a combination of all of those things seems to be the only possible explanation. They are the antithesis of each other in their in their political characteristics, and we could go on about that at great length. But we're going to move on to a bit of British politics now, and let me just refer back to my conversation with Kemi Badenoch, the Tory party leader, and her plan to ban strikes by doctors if she gets into power. She said this.
It's because of what we're seeing now. We want to ban strikes so that doctors fall into the same category as the military, police officers and prison officers, because we're seeing an increasing militancy with the BMA, which we haven't seen before. So something new is happening. This is about the 11th or 12th strike that we've had in about 2 years. It's cost the NHS about £1.5 billion. Missed operations, delayed care, patients dying. People are dying when doctors go on strike. And because of the way that the BMA is negotiating, when we were in government, we had difficulties with them. Labour said they'd come in and sort it out. They gave them what they asked for, a 28% pay rise, and they're striking again.
Yeah. So that was Kemi Badenoch talking a little bit earlier on. Rachel, what do you reckon? She will not be unaware of the way the opinion polls have moved. So more than half of people now oppose the doctor strikes, which was not the case last time we were here.
No, and Wes Streeting isn't unaware of that fact either. And interestingly, I think if you listen to his language about the resident doctor strikes, it's quite similar to language that you might hear from Kemi Badenoch or a Conservative. He's talked about how the public won't forgive them. He's talked about how, the NHS is hanging by a thread and they want to break it or something like that. So the positions of certainly the Labour Health Secretary and the Conservatives are not that far apart. But on the point about banning strikes, yes, let's wave a magic wand and let's make it illegal for doctors to strike. Let's make it illegal for anyone to strike. Sure, fine. You cannot, at least in a liberal democracy where we don't tell children at age 18 what career they have to go into and then ban anyone from ever leaving the country, you cannot force people to do jobs that they do not want to do.
We do it for police officers and prison workers.
No, we don't. We don't have a law that says that you have to be a police officer. You can't go on strike. Yes, that is true. We don't say, though, that an individual has to go work in the police force, and the difference is that we don't have private police forces in the country, so we don't have police officers going, oh, I could get paid more if I joined this private police force, so I think I'll do that. We don't have other countries where they are crying out for British police officers in the same way that we do with Australia, America, Dubai, all those other countries that are saying, come over here, you're a trained doctor, come over here and we will pay you X amount that is higher than what you'd ever get in the UK. And also, by the way, your working conditions are much more conducive to actually having a life, which, by the way, I think, and Wes Streeting thinks, is more important in terms of improving the quality of life and the sort of working culture for resident doctors than pay. I think conditions and the fact that they can be expected to move halfway across the country at 3 weeks' notice and can't get annual leave booked off even for their own weddings is a bigger issue than pay, and you can sort some of that stuff out without it really costing anything. But fundamentally, if you accept that you have a recruitment and a retention crisis in the NHS, in medicine, which we do have, not just in doctors but in nurses and other health workers, and you can't force people to work in those jobs because they can just go abroad or choose not to do those jobs, these are bright people, go into other spheres, other industries, other jobs, then you do have to do something about whatever it is about the job that is making people feel that they are not valued, not respected, and they would rather do something else. That's all I'm saying.
Look, I think a lot of patients who have their operations cancelled, the NHS doesn't treat a whole range of people well. We put it on a pedestal. We think it's the best in the world in how it treats a lot of its patients, how it treats a lot of its doctors, nurses, isn't good. I agree with Rachel that is the fundamental issue. We need to improve working conditions and how people are respected and dealt with. But I think the public who face a massive tax burden, people in the private sector who are having their pay often trimmed, and don't have the gold-plated pensions that people in the public sector have. I think, doctors have their temptations to go abroad, etc. But overall, the package in the UK is still quite good and it's quite competitive. And for the public to be held to ransom by these doctors, a lot of whom you look at what they say at the top of the BMA, just like the head of the teaching, these are militant people. They're not just professional advocates. And so I'm not entirely sure what I think about what Kemi Badenoch has said, but I think it's entirely justifiable to say, given the monopoly you have, you may have the right to strike withdrawn from you, because I think they are pushing the public beyond the limits of tolerance.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're told that quite a high proportion of a lot of doctors do contemplate going abroad, often to Australia, Canada. Now, in Canada and Australia, it is also not legal to take strike action if you're a doctor, but the pay rates are very much higher than they are, and the starting pay rates for resident junior doctors are very much higher. You're then presenting doctors who I think can all agree. I think you say they're pretty well paid. A junior doctor starts after 7 years of study in something in the low 30s.
Oh yeah, that's exceptional though. I think that sort of and also I don't know whether you're comparing pension rights with Canada and Australia as well. I think one of the things that I think would be sensible.
Pensions don't pay your rent. Just say.
No. If you let me finish my point, actually, I was just going to say one of the things that I think would be sensible is if you could bring some of that pension forward and actually have it as pay now.
Yeah, I think Wes Streeting actually had that as as something they thought they were talking about.
That is an ongoing conversation of how to do that in the public sector.
We may have even had a moment of agreement there, Rachel.
I think we do agree. I think where we disagree is that I was just talking specifically about the practicalities of would these strikes all go away if you just made them illegal, and the answer is maybe the strikes would go away, but the problems of people not wanting to work in the health service under these conditions, those conditions pay and other things as well, those won't go away. And if ultimately what you want is to fix the experience for the patient, then you do need to look at getting enough people in healthcare to enable that to happen.
Yeah. Okay, well look, I mean, not too far apart on this one, actually.
No.
I think, but you don't have to have a fist fight every time you sit down together in the studio. This is,
We never have a fist fight,
not
listeners.
necessarily that kind of
A
program.
war of words.
I am grateful to both of you, as always, for joining me in the studio. It was so fascinating to talk and to listen and to hear and to.
I'm going to have a lie down after tonight's episode.
You've earned it, Tim. You totally earned it. So our producers were Emily Leahy, technical operator Isaac Marley. I'm going to be back tomorrow, and Kate Borsay is live from Southport up next on Times Radio.